What about economic growth? Can we have sustainable development?
I think if we want to think more deeply about economic growth and sustainable development, one of the difficult questions we have to ask, and it is a difficult question, is what our response is to capitalism. Most people on this planet now are living in systems that are dominated by capitalism. If they're not living directly under that system, then I think I would also argue that most people on this planet, to some extent, are being impacted by the outcomes of capitalism. And it's a really difficult argument because capitalism has brought us immense gains. We have a vaccine now for COVID that we could argue is largely driven because of organisations that are set up to make profit. I work in a lovely university that is set up to make profit. I buy lovely goods from shops that I don't necessarily need, but I want them, and that makes somebody a healthy profit. I think the deep thought we have to have is to think about the unintended consequences of capitalism.
Right, so economic growth has served humanity very well in many ways over the last 300 or 400 years. And you can see that in lots of different ways, but one particularly good way to look at it in terms of life expectancy. Life expectancy today is dramatically better than it was even 100 years ago. And people are living better and longer lives. There's a good argument for saying that people have never had it so good. Our lives globally are better now than for the majority of people than they ever have been. That isn't to say there's not lots of poverty, but the mass famines which used to plague humanity in the past and really are a thing of the past. We can deal with them, and there's no reason why people need to starve. We've got the resources to deal with it. So economic growth has served us well, but the trouble with economic growth is that it involves using lots of resources, it has created lots of pollution, and many economists are now getting to the point where they're saying this is a model that just doesn't make sense. We have to live within planetary limits.
I would go back to Marx, and even back in the 1800s, Marx was writing quite clearly about the impact of industry on the environment, the extraction of resources from a finite planet. And even, he was saying then even that cannot continue. And likewise, he even talked about the way in which workers are being dominated to live their lives due to what capitalism wants. I don't think we can live without it. It would be very difficult to imagine a world without capitalism now, but I think we can think more deeply about the outcomes, and not necessarily the direct outcomes, but the unintended consequences.
And the answer is yes, we can do things better, but we're going to have to do things better very quickly and very dramatically. The danger with sustainable development is that it puts together two ideas which are incompatible. The idea of sustainability, which is a stable state, with development, which is a state of change. And what the value of the term is that it means everything to anybody, but it's actually got what's called ambivalence value, which means it doesn't really mean anything at all because they're two contradictory ideas which are put together in a single phrase. So sustainable development, yes, we certainly want to think about what it could mean, but be very careful not to be misled by the rhetoric, because you could argue that no development can ever really be sustainable, although we can make it much more sustainable. So there's a complicated set of ideas here which are unpacked around a simple slogan of sustainable development. And where this takes us is to say, well, the economic model that we've got at the moment needs to be recalibrated. We are addicted as a society to the notion of progress. No politician could ever get elected at the moment and say we're going to stop growing. The growth of the economy is absolutely fundamental to the way we operate, and yet it is a flawed model. So that's a really interesting point to have got to historically, and it sets off some challenges for the future, which are it's absolutely fundamental that we explore them.